Sharon, thank you. Thank you so much for joining us this evening in this edition of La Casa del Vecino, our neighbor's house. As you know, as a non-profit organization, LIGA, we have been concentrating mostly on promoting emerging Latin American architects, but now we're taking this specific sidestep and looking as well what's happening on the other side of the border and looking at these residential projects in the US. You are the fourth in a series of, so almost the last, in a series of 5 30 minutes conversations. Next week, we'll have the last one with Paul Andersen, who will talk about this mother house in Denver, Colorado. Before we start, we'd like to thank enormously Panel Rey. You see in the top right corner, our sponsor for making this program happen. And we'd like to welcome the people as well that are joining us through the network of Arkina and Mextropolis, their streaming channels. So, Sharon, thank you so much for willing to do this. It's super kind, and I really see it as a support that I've always received from you guys towards LIGA. I have a feeling I know your work since ever. I think I also lived in LA for 7 years, so we had a chance to meet up sometimes to get to know each other's office or your kids. We've been participating in the MOS, in the Orders 100 program as well. No, where Michael Meredith of MOS was there as well. He reminded me last week. Johnston Marklee has beaten Productora in competitions, and you have also invited us as curators to the Chicago Architectural Biennial. And so it's a pleasure to have this conversation about what for me is a very, very specific, a really interesting project, the Vault House. And the last thing that I remember as well, Mark at a certain moment also wrote a text for LIGA for the exhibition of Diego Arraigado, the Argentinian architect. You did the house together in Argentina. So a lot of connections, and I really would like to present the house to my public, and I'm going to give you the floor to start talking a bit about the general idea of that building.
Sure. Thank you, Wonne. It's really a pleasure to be here, and I feel like this conversation series is really in the spirit of how we all sort of practice and share ideas and curate projects, and I feel like that speaks to something about our kind of loose generation of architects. So it's really good, the work that you guys do at LIGA and all. So happy to be here tonight.
Thank you. So for those who don't know it, can you guide us a little bit through the basic ideas? Arturo, can you bring up some images?
Yeah, thank you so much. Super. So you can go to the next slide, Arturo. Tonight I'm going to talk a little bit about the Vault House, which was finished in around 2013, and it's in a plot in Oxnard, which is about an hour north of Los Angeles, and it's you can go to the next slide. It's obviously on the beach, and what's kind of special about this particular parcel is that it's very long and narrow, so it's 40 feet wide in total and 120 feet long. So it's a kind of exceptional proportion. And the other thing about it is that on the north side of the house, it had a weird sort of setback, and so we're 15 feet. We can extend 15 feet out further than our neighbor. So I think the kind of first things that became kind of conditions for us is addressing this long and narrow site, which we do by adding a courtyard, which is that square that you can see in the middle of the bar, and then also capitalizing on this kind of not totally symmetrical shotgun, but this long narrow house that has this sort of appendage that offers a view to the north. And this was for a family who was a couple, and they had their daughters were sort of starting college, but they're quite a social group. And so if you could go to the next slide, the idea that we generated with our clients was to think about the house as a collection of rooms. And on the one hand, we had a very tight envelope, which is maximized in the project and represented through this rectangular plexi box. And the idea of this collection of rooms that are all oriented in the same direction, which is in the east-west orientation towards the ocean, was that you could be in sort of any room in the house and have views and light and air and such all the way through. So it could sort of open and close a little bit like a kaleidoscope. And in the next slide, you can see how they're all sort of packed together and oriented in that way. And to a large extent, in this planning idea, we eliminated the sort of service spaces that you typically see in a house, like corridors and such, so that there ends up being a lot of contact between the rooms and less of those sort of threshold spaces that you might normally see that create privacy and a more traditional house plan. And the next image diagram, it sort of captures this idea we had about, it's very much a response to the climate, to the view, so that not only is the view drawn all the way through those 140 feet, with the rooms that are furthest away from the view are the guest bedrooms, but even from those rooms you have that view. You also have light and air passing through the house that's amplified by having a courtyard void halfway through that 140 feet. And the next slide, I think, captures this book has sort of been a bit of a Bible for us, especially for our work here in Southern California. And Banham talks about in this book the four ecologies of Southern California, which are, of course, the beach, the plains, the sort of suburbia, the foothills, so the hillside topography, and then also autotopia. And so I think for us, the project was interesting because we were really trying to take on the beach house, which is, of course, a sort of canonical landscape of Southern California, but in a way, a sort of under-examined type. And so I think for us, we thought about, if you could go to the next slide, in a way, it's a sort of hybrid of a kind of shotgun house, this sort of long, narrow residential typology with a kind of courtyard. And so the two of those together for us were sort of encapsulated in this collage, which Wonne, is sort of a language of representation that we've explored, where by, just distilling the idea of this plinth that hovers over the landscape and the rooftop of Casa Malaparte just hovering over the landscape and the horizon of the Pacific Ocean somehow is this sort of volumetric expression that sits on this raised ground is really the kind of essential expression we see of the house.
I maybe later want to come back to this idea of how you work with collage and that relation to history, because of course I immediately recognized the Malaparte. When I moved to LA, I was super surprised by these beach houses, how like the shotgun quality of it. Like if you see them all next to the highway, especially when you drive up through above north from LA, all the Pacific Coast Highway. It's really this urban setting, and it's strange when you think of the beach house, you don't immediately think of such a shotgun setting, with these houses like almost row houses one next to the other. And so when we've been doing this program about the American houses, the one often thinks of this banal plot of a sort of suburban setting. But in your case, it's something very different. It's a beach quality, but it also has this urban quality of the house, and of course, it has the ocean right in front of it. Can you talk a little bit more about that relation, or how the project relates?
Yeah, I think it's right that it is really shocking how, given the sort of extremities of the beach on one side and the road or the highway on the other, that the sort of normal planning of these shotgun beach houses, and that was sort of a starting point. So if you could go to the next slide, Arturo. There were a couple sort of other conditions that were really specific to this beach, and every beach is very different depending on its landscape and width and kind of where it sits along the California coast. But one of the other exceptions here was that we're in a tsunami zone.